settle in, and let me tell you about Nicholas. Not a bad boy, exactly, but the kind of boy who noticed things, who remembered things, who filed away small truths and produced them at precisely the most inconvenient moment. The kind of boy, in other words, that aunts find absolutely exhausting. It began at breakfast, on a morning that had already decided to be difficult. Nicholas had been forbidden from going to Jackborough Sands. His cousins were going. His aunt had arranged it. But Nicholas had placed a frog in his morning bread and milk, and when this was discovered, the punishment was swift and absolute. No sands, no sea, no fun of any kind. But here's the thing about Nicholas. He had put that frog there deliberately. Not out of malice, exactly. More as an experiment, to see what would happen. And what happened was exactly what he expected. Because you see, his aunt had already told him, quite firmly, the day before, that there was no frog in his bread and milk. She had told him this before he had even mentioned a frog. She had invented a certainty to win an argument that hadn't started yet. And Nicholas had thought, well then, let me give her something real to be certain about. The frog appeared. The punishment followed. And Nicholas accepted it all with a serenity that his aunt found somehow more irritating than tears would have been. The aunt's plan was simple, as punishments often are. Nicholas was to stay in the dull part of the garden, the part with the gravel paths and the geometric flower beds, and absolutely nothing of interest. The interesting part, the part with the strawberry beds and the big fig tree and the wonderful dark shed, was forbidden to him. Particularly forbidden was the lumber room, the door with the key, the room full of things put away and forgotten. This, of course, only made it shimmer. His aunt patrolled the morning with great self-satisfaction, announcing that she would be watching the garden gate, and that Nicholas was absolutely not to go near the lumber room, and that the key to the lumber room was most certainly not in the kitchen, near the second shelf, under the old preserving pan. She may not have said that last part exactly, but she said enough. And so Nicholas, with the patience of a general and the curiosity of a cat, waited. He watched his aunt settle herself near the garden door with an expression of righteous vigilance. He noted the kitchen was briefly empty. He located the key, which was, in fact, near the second shelf, and he slipped, quiet as smoke, through the door of the lumber room. The lock turned. The door swung inward, and the smell that came out to meet him, old wood, dried lavender, dust, and something sweet and indefinable, hit him like a held breath finally released. Oh, the lumber room. I want you to picture it the way Nicholas saw it. Not as a cluttered storage space, not as a room full of old junk, but as a world that had been quietly waiting, patient as a sleeping house, full of the kind of magic that only accumulates when things are left alone long enough. There were candlesticks, like silver trees, a teapot shaped like a duck, a box of glass beads that caught the thin light and scattered it like tiny promises. There was a book of stories from many lands, with pictures he had never seen, illustrations strange and vivid and alive. He could have spent an hour on that book alone. But then he found the tapestry. It was large and old and hung against one wall, and it showed a hunter in a forest. The hunter had his bow raised, and nearby a great stag stood watching with dark, knowing eyes. Hounds were coursing through the trees at the edges. But look closer. In the branches above the hunter, there were wolves. 4 of them, waiting. And Nicholas looked at that tapestry the way children look at things when no one is rushing them along, when no one is explaining the meaning or pointing to the moral. He wondered whether the hunter would shoot the stag before the wolves came down. He wondered which way the story was going to fall. He stood there in the lovely dusty quiet, and he thought, and he wondered, and he was completely, entirely happy now. While Nicholas was lost in his private kingdom of wonders, something was happening in the garden. His aunt, you understand, had been watching the gate all morning with the absolute certainty that Nicholas was going to try to sneak in from that direction. She was so sure of this that when she heard a sound near the rainwater tank, a splash, a scramble, she assumed it must be him. She leaned over to look. She leaned a little further, and then, with a dignity-destroying inevitability, she fell in. Now the rainwater tank was not deep enough to be dangerous, but it was deep enough to be deeply undignified, and the sides were smooth, and she could not, by herself, get out. She called for Nicholas, and Nicholas, still warm from the wonders of the tapestry, still carrying the dreaming quality of someone who has been somewhere very far away, came to the garden door and listened. "Nicholas," she said with great effort, "I have fallen into the rainwater tank. Go and fetch the ladder from under the cherry tree." And Nicholas, after a long and thoughtful pause, said very gently, very reasonably, that he couldn't possibly go into the garden, because he had been told he was not to go into the garden, and surely she, of all people, would not want him to disobey. She said she was his aunt, and she was giving him permission. He said that perhaps it was the evil one, taking his aunt's voice, as the evil one was known to do. One could never be too careful about these things. She stayed in the tank a good while longer, long enough for the cook to hear her calling and come running with the ladder, long enough for the rescue to be witnessed by the gardener's boy, who would certainly remember it, long enough, in short, for the humiliation to be complete. When she finally emerged, dripping, furious, cold, she discovered 2 things almost simultaneously. 1, Nicholas had clearly been in the lumber room, because the key was in the wrong place, and she could tell, in the way that adults can tell, that something had been looked at and touched and quietly adored. 2, Nicholas himself was sitting in the dull part of the garden with an expression of absolute, unimpeachable innocence. She told him he would have no jam at tea. He received this news with tranquility, because Nicholas didn't need jam. He had the hunter and the stag and the wolves waiting in the branches. He had the glass beads and the duck-shaped teapot and the stories from many lands. He had a whole afternoon of genuine, uninterrupted wonder sitting inside him, like warmth, like gold, and no one could touch it, or take it, or send it to its room. His aunt had tried to make the day a punishment. Instead, she had made it extraordinary. And as the evening came in across the garden, quiet and cool, Nicholas sat with his secret held close, feeling the particular satisfaction of someone who has found the treasure the map didn't show, the best kind of treasure, the kind no one else even knew to look for.